Desert does not
economic
wait for
warfare
permission to
and
grow.
sanctions,
Neither does a nation that has finally found
rifles,
its soul.
wooden.
In the
Not
scorched
because the
heart of
country
West
couldn't afford
Africa,
real ones.
where the dust
Mountains
of the
designed
Sahel
to strangle
swallows
the
horizon, a
AES.
miracle is
Attempts at
unfolding.
regime
It is not a
destabilization,
miracle of
coups,
gold or oil,
assassinations,
but of
proxy
soil and
conflicts,
spirit.
political isolation
In
from
June
Western-aligned
2025, while the
blocs,
world's
all at
elites
once,
debated
all
carbon credits in
coordinated.
air-conditioned
And
halls of
Mali
landlocked
is preparing
nations,
for
it
all
is
of it.
impossible. 10 million trees, 30 days.
Goïta led a
$0
military
of
coup
foreign
that
aid.
removed President
This was not a
Ibrahim
project
Boubacar
managed by
Keïta from
high-priced
power.
consultants
The
from
justification,
Washington or Brussels.
security.
There were no
The government had
grants from the
failed.
IMF, no
Terrorism was
oversight from the
spreading.
United Nations,
Soldiers were
and no
dying. And nothing was.
celebrity-led
But here's what
charity
makes
funds.
Goïta different.
Instead, there were
He didn't just remove a
10,000
president.
women, a handful of
He
shovels,
dismantled
and
a
vision that has
system.
set the
A
continent
system designed to keep
ablaze.
Mali weak. A
This is the
system
story
Mali's
of Burkina
gold-funded
Faso's
foreign
quiet
banks,
revolution,
while
a
its soldiers
movement led
held
by
wooden
Captain
guns.
Ibrahim Traoré
A
that is
system where
redrawing
France
the map
decided
of
bought
human
with Malian
dignity.
gold.
Do not
No
look away.
permitted what Mali
comes
could
next
buy
may change
when it
how
could
we
act.
read the map
And
of the
Goïta
world.
looked at that system
If
and
you believe
said,
in these stories of
no
courage
more.
and truth, give
France
us
is
your life.
expelled.
Leave your
From
thoughts in
Mali.
the comments and
Not
subscribe
politely.
to Africa
Not gradually.
Unchained to
Out.
continue this journey together.
Military agreements
Your
terminate.
support keeps
And for the
flame
first
of
time in
independence
decades,
burning.
Mali began to
For
decide for
decades, the
itself
narrative of
what
Africa
weapons
has
it
been one
needed,
of a
how
begging
much to
bowl.
spend, no
We have been
apologies,
told that
and the
without
message is
Western
clear.
intervention, the
Mali
continent
isn't
would wither.
when to
We have
act.
been taught that
The alarming
development
began.
is something that
Russia,
arrives on a
Turkey,
cargo plane
China,
wrapped in a foreign
anyone willing to
flag.
sell without
But in
strings
the villages
attached,
of Burkina Faso,
drones,
that myth is being
helicopters,
buried in the
armored
very
vehicles,
holes
munition,
dug for these
training
new
programs.
forests. At the
Mali
center
wasn't
of
just
this
buying
seismic
weapons,
shift
it
is a
was
young
reclaiming
leader whose
sovereignty.
name has become a
And the
rallying
funding,
cry for
done
African
asking.
self-reliance.
Quick message before we
Captain
continue.
Ibrahim
Foreign
Traoré.
financial systems, restricted
When
by
he took
French
the stage in
oversight,
Ouagadougou, he
funneled
didn't
through
promise
agreements
more
that
aid. He
prioritized
didn't ask
everyone
for more
except
loans.
Mali.
He spoke a
Goïta
truth that
broke those
resonated
chains.
through the decades,
He redirected
reaching back
Mali's
to the
no
ancestors
permission,
and forward
no
to the
approval,
unborn.
no
A
excuses.
country that cannot
And
feed
yesterday,
itself is a
we
country
saw
that
the
cannot
results.
stand tall.
New
declared his voice
military
steady,
equipment
his
was
uniform
delivered
a
directly to the
reminder of a
Malian
soldier's
army.
duty.
Not
And a people that must be saved by others is a people not yet free. To the elder generation watching from Detroit to Baltimore, from London to Nairobi, these words carried a familiar weight. They echoed the defiance of the 1960s civil rights movements. They carried the bootstrap spirit that built the greatest communities in history. This was the African 1776, a declaration that the chains of dependency are not broken by signatures on a treaty, but by calloused hands in the dirt. But Traoré did not invent this fire. He simply fanned the embers left behind by a giant. To understand the forest rising today, we must look at the ghost that still haunts the Sahel, Thomas Sankara. 40 years ago, Sankara, the Che Guevara of Africa, vowed to plant 10 million trees to stop the encroaching Sahara. He dreamed of a Burkina Faso that wore its own cotton and ate its own grain. He was silenced by a bullet in 1987, and for nearly 4 decades, his dream was buried under layers of corruption and foreign debt. The world thought the upright men were gone. They were wrong. What we are witnessing in 2025 is not just reforestation. It is a resurrection. When Traoré finished his speech, he didn't just ignite a nation, he awakened a sleeping giant. The message was clear: the time for waiting is over. The time for planting has begun. However, as the first 5 million saplings were lowered into the parched earth in a single hour, a chilling silence fell over the Western capitals. Why was there no applause? Why did the headlines remain blank? As the green canopy began to stretch across the horizon, the world's power brokers realized something terrifying. If Burkina Faso can build a forest without their money, they can build a future without their permission. But as the first saplings took root, the shadows began to move. The revolution was no longer just against the desert. It was against the system that needed Africa to stay thirsty. The desert was a wall, but the people became a flood. In the blistering heat of June 2025, a logistical feat was performed that would have baffled the most seasoned military generals. The objective was simple: plant 5 million trees in under 60 minutes. The result was staggering. By the end of the month, 10 million saplings had found a home in the dust. But it was not the speed that caught the world off guard. It was the hands that did the work. This was the army of the forgotten. 10,000 women, many of them widows, many of them grandmothers with skin like parched parchment and hearts like flint, stepped forward. They were not selected by gender quotas or international diversity initiatives. They were the ones who had never left the land even when the rain did. They carried saplings across fields where even the grass had given up. They didn't wait for heavy machinery. They used buckets, bare hands, and traditional hymns that had been sung since the days of the Mossi Empire. Let us take a moment here not to rush forward but to give thanks. Write a comment with a simple thank you to Traoré, to Burkina Faso, or to the spirit of sovereignty itself. Gratitude is not a formality. It is recognition, it is dignity expressed in words. When you add your voice of thanks, you are not just engaging with a video, you are standing in solidarity with a story of freedom and pride. So before we continue, take this pause to comment your thank you. Together, those words become a beacon that shines far beyond the screen. The brilliance of Captain Ibrahim Traoré lay in his rejection of the expert class. In a region where development is usually a top-down affair managed from glass towers in Geneva, this operation was rooted in the soil. Local village councils, imams, school teachers, and elders became the architects of their own survival. Water was transported in government trucks usually reserved for the front lines of defense. National nurseries funded not by foreign grants, but by the state's own redirected budget provided the lifeblood of the campaign. For the elder generation in the United States, this story rings a bell that hasn't been heard in decades. It is the spirit of the pioneers. It is the victory gardens of the 1940s. It is the grit of the Great Depression where men and women built their way out of ruin. This is African self-reliance in its purest form. It is the refusal to accept that poverty is a permanent condition. By the end of July, the results were undeniable. Satellite imagery, the cold, unblinking eyes in the sky, confirmed what the skeptics had dismissed as propaganda. The desert was shrinking. Over 2,000 hectares of previously degraded land that had been written off as dead by international agencies were showing signs of life. Groundwater retention in the pilot zones increased by 18%. But as the green canopy began to rise, the political temperature began to boil. You see, in the eyes of the global establishment, a tree in Burkina Faso is never just a tree. It is a challenge. If a nation can revive its land without a loan, it can revive its laws without a lobbyist. If it can find water without a Western contractor, it can find its own path to the future. The success of the 10,000 women started a conversation that the old world wasn't ready to have. In the markets of Ouagadougou and the villages of Gawa, the people began to ask, if we can build a forest with our own hands, what else can we build? Why are we still using currency printed in Paris? Why are our minerals sold for pennies on the dollar? The forest was becoming more than a windbreak. It was becoming a liberation zone. And that is when the whispers began. Not of praise, but of sabotage. While the women sang and the saplings grew, a different kind of seed was being planted in the dark. A seed of resistance from those who stood to lose everything if Africa finally stood on its own 2 feet. But as the roots deepened, the shadows lengthened. Sovereignty, you see, is a dangerous crop to grow in a world that thrives on your dependency. While the women of Burkina Faso were healing the earth, a different kind of storm was gathering in the glass towers of distant capitals. The silence from the international community was deafening. There were no front-page spreads in the major Western broadsheets. No glowing segments on the nightly news celebrating this green miracle. Why? Because this was a success they did not author. It was a victory they could not tax. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré bypassed the traditional aid models, he didn't just plant trees. He planted a seed of doubt in the minds of those who believe Africa cannot breathe without a Western respirator. One anonymous analyst in Washington reportedly called the operation a credible challenge to multilateral aid. Another warned of political contagion. They fear that if the people of the Sahel realize they can reclaim their land with their own hands, they will soon realize
Mali remembers humiliation. There was a time when its soldiers trained from wooden guns to steel resolve. Let me take you back through intermediaries, not through UN oversight, not through French partnerships. State to army, direct, immediate, operational. This wasn't a parade. It was preparation. Because President Assimi Goïta understands exactly what President Ibrahim Traoré has been warning about.
That mainstream media refuses to provide.
The Black Winter is coming. Let's talk about what the Black Winter actually means. Because this isn't some vague metaphor. It's a forecast. President Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso and president of the Alliance of Sahel states, warned that the Sahel is entering a phase of intensified destabilization, worse than the Arab Spring of 2011, worse than the chaos that destroyed Libya and flooded the region with weapons and fighters. The Black Winter includes
that follows when a people decide to own the land they walk upon. In Burkina Faso, the pressure took a sinister turn. Reports began to surface of sabotage. In the dead of night, unknown figures set fire to state-funded nurseries. Water pipelines painstakingly laid to sustain the saplings were vandalized. Responsibility, only whispers of political operatives tied to the old regimes, those who would rather see the land burn than see it flourish under a leader they cannot control. But they underestimated the spirit of the Burkina. They underestimated the mothers. In response, the women didn't cry for help from the UN. They didn't wait for a security firm. They organized night watches. They formed human chains around the planting sites. They turned the act of reforestation into an act of resistance. This is the heart of African self-reliance, the understanding that what you build with your own sweat, you will defend with your own life. By September 2025, Traoré took the next step. He didn't just protect the trees, he protected the economy they were creating. New laws were signed, laws that ensured the shea butter, the moringa, and the baobab fruit harvested from these forests would be processed in Burkina Faso by the very women who planted them. He signed cooperative frameworks with neighbors like Algeria and Iran, focusing on solar irrigation and seed banks. He was redrawing the map of influence. And for those used to holding the pen, that was the ultimate provocation. The question was no longer just about the environment. It was about power. As the liberation zones, as the youth began to call, the new forests started to bloom, a terrifying question began to echo across the continent. If we can do this with trees, what else can we rebuild? That question is what keeps the old world awake at night. Because the answer doesn't involve a loan, a debt, or a thank you to a foreign donor. The answer is found in the calloused palms of 10,000 women. But as the movement grows, the stakes are rising. The price of this independence is being calculated in the dark, and the next chapter will determine if this green revolution can survive a world that is still very much in love with the desert. To understand the gravity of what is happening in the Sahel, you must understand the man who refuses to wear a crown. Captain Ibrahim Traoré does not govern from the gilded isolation of a palace. He is often found where the dust is thickest, his boots caked in the same red clay as the women of Gawa. He has traded the diplomat's tie for the soldier's fatigue, not as a gesture of war, but as a symbol of work. To him, the forest is not a green initiative to be filed away in a report. The results of this grit are now carved into the landscape. By late August 2025, the data began to tell a story that the world's financial institutions could no longer ignore. In the pilot zones, once barren stretches of land where children were taught the vocabulary of hunger, crop yields have doubled. The earth, long neglected and abused by industrial exploitation, is breathing again. Groundwater levels have risen by 18%, a statistic that translates into something far more precious than gold, the ability for a mother to wash her children and water her garden without fear of the well running dry. But this economic shift is about more than just survival. It is about the birth of a new marketplace. New micro-enterprises are sprouting as fast as the saplings, women-led cooperatives producing shea butter moringa leaves and baobab fruit processed locally and sold with pride. This is the bootstrap economy that the elder generation in America knows so well. It is the story of Detroit's resilience, the grit of the Mississippi Delta, and the unwavering spirit of those who built their own schools and businesses when the world turned its back. Pause for a moment and share with us where you are watching this video. Are you watching from the vibrant streets of Nairobi, the historic neighborhoods of Atlanta, or perhaps a quiet town in the English countryside? Every place matters, and every voice adds a thread to this global tapestry.
Et exemplaire de l'entreprise.
You for being here. May the same spirit of freedom and dignity that is rising in Burkina Faso walk beside you in your own journey wherever you are. Yet as the harvest begins to grow, so does the cost. There is a price for walking away from the master's table, and Burkina Faso is paying it in full. The traditional powers have not used tanks to stop this movement. They have used the invisible hand of economic warfare. Sanctions have been tightened. Foreign credit has dried up. International aid agencies, once so vocal about saving the continent, have retreated into a strategic silence, waiting for the experiment to fail. They expect the people to break. They expect the hunger to turn the citizens against their leader. But they have forgotten the history of the upright men. In the face of this isolation, the Burkinabe have not marched in protest to beg for the return of foreign loans. Instead, they have intensified their labor. They have turned the sanctions into a forge. When the world stopped sending fertilizers, the villages developed their own organic alternatives. When the Western contractors left, the local engineers took over the solar grids. This is the price of pride. It is the heavy burden of knowing that your independence is bought with your own sweat, not with another nation's charity. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the risk is personal. He knows the fate of those who came before him, those who dared to dream of an unchained Africa. He knows that the more successful the forest becomes, the more dangerous his position grows. Because a forest that feeds its people is a forest that cannot be controlled. As we look at the murals painted by local artists in the streets of Ouagadougou, images of shovels, deep roots, and the ancestors, we see a nation that has stopped looking at the horizon for a savior and started looking at the ground beneath its feet. But the shadows of the old world are not easily dispelled. Even as the trees reach for the sky, a new and more complex challenge is appearing on the global stage, one that will test whether this green revolution can withstand the weight of a world that is still determined to see Africa in chains. The forests of Burkina Faso are no longer just a collection of trees. They have become a living archive of a people's will. As the sun sets over the Sahel, casting long amber shadows across the millions of saplings now swaying in the breeze, one thing is clear. The desert of the mind has been conquered before the desert of the sand. This movement has reached far beyond the borders of West Africa. In the pews of churches in Detroit and the community centers of Atlanta, the images of these 10,000 women have sparked a flame of recognition. To the elders who marched for dignity in the 60s, this is a familiar victory. It is the realization that true freedom is not a gift bestowed by a legislature or a foreign embassy. It is a harvest reaped from your own soil. The struggle for a green Burkina is the same struggle for a resilient Baltimore or a thriving Harlem. It is the universal demand for the right to define one's own destiny. But as we look toward the horizon of 2050, we must acknowledge the weight of this moment. This is a hinge in history. For the first time in nearly half a century, the spirit of Thomas Sankara is not a ghost to be mourned, but a reality to be lived. The upright men have returned, and they are carrying shovels instead of begging bowls. They are proving that the most sustainable energy on earth is not solar or wind, but the unchained human spirit. Before we close, let us pause. What you have just heard is not simply an episode of history. It is a reminder that sovereignty, Dignity and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed by those brave enough to reach for them. If this message has moved you, if it has challenged the way you see the world, then subscribe to this channel, Africa Unchained. We do not ask for your subscription for the sake of numbers. We ask because we are building a sanctuary where the voices of independence are honored and where stories of pride are told with the weight they deserve. By subscribing, you are choosing to walk with us into the next chapter of a story that is only just beginning. Do not let this moment pass into silence. Join us and stand ready for the world that is rising. The story of the 10,000 women and the forest they built is a testament to a simple, piercing truth. When a nation stops waiting to be saved, it becomes unstoppable. The silence of the Western media cannot stifle the sound of 10 million trees breathing. The sabotage of the old regimes cannot wither roots that have found the water of self-respect. As we look to the future, the legacy of this green revolution will be measured not just in hectares, but in the confidence of the children who will walk beneath these canopies. They will not know a Burkina Faso that begs. They will know a nation that plants. They will look at the work of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and see a leader who understood that the greatest defense of a nation is its ability to sustain itself. This is the ultimate triumph of African self-reliance. It is a model that rejects the chains of debt and embraces the power of the community. It is a signal to the rest of the world that the era of the forgotten is over. Through the vision of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a new map is being drawn, one where Africa is no longer the world's laboratory for aid, but the world's teacher of resilience. The desert is retreating, the canopy is rising, and for the first time in centuries, the people of the Sahel are the ones holding the sun.